Hey guys, we are looking at exploring world history, lesson number 30. And we're going to be talking about Amos today. And Amos was a prophet in the Bible. And before we kind of get started into Amos, I want to talk a little bit about what a prophet is or who a prophet was. And basically, a prophet is a spokesman for God. Okay? Prophets received a personal and specific call from God to deliver his message to a specific audience. God calls the prophets my servants, okay? In the Bible, he calls them my servants. So they're servants of God who are called to give a specific message to a specific audience. Prophets warned Israel of punishment that was coming because of their sins. Basically, the prophets gave a very specific thing that they were doing, but the ultimate message was you need to repent and return to God, or else there's going to be a judgment. Okay? There was different types of messages, though, that the prophets would go about and how they delivered them. Okay? Some addressed the people very directly. Sometimes they used parables. Sometimes they used allegories. Prophets sometimes would act out the messages for the people. Sometimes they would write them down. And sometimes they would recall the past and try to explain to Israel what was going on. And today when we hear, so that was basically prophets. And today when we hear prophecy, one of the first things we think about, at least most people think about, is that there's some type of predicting the future in the common meaning or association with the word prophecy today. It's usually we're thinking they're forecasting something that's going to happen in the future. But there was in the biblical times of prophecy, even though that was true a lot, there's 2 points about prophetic predictions, okay? One is that some predictions were conditional, okay? If you do these things, then this is going to happen. If you don't do these things, then this other thing is going to happen. And it kind of basically says if you repent, you're going to get the blessings of God. But if you don't repent, you're going to get the judgment of God. Most predictions that the Old Testament prophets made have already been fulfilled. One recurring theme, though, in Old Testament prophecies is the call to social and ethical righteousness, okay? Prophecies, though, and one final thing on prophecies, even though there was a lot of you need to repent, you're doing these things wrong, there's going to be judgment, prophecies always had a word of hope, okay? So now, let's get back into, let's talk about Amos, okay? And Amos was the unlikely prophet. In fact, that's the title of this lesson, Amos the Unlikely Prophet, okay? So why was he unlikely? Why was he an unlikely prophet? Well, first and foremost, he was not a full-time preacher. He basically was a shepherd and grew figs on his farm, and all of a sudden God come to him and said, this is what I need you to do. I need to go talk to these people. So he was not a full-time preacher. He was just a farmer, so he was an unlikely prophet from that standpoint. He lived in the area of Tekoa, which is about 12 miles south of Jerusalem. And during this time, Israel was split into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, okay? And God called Amos to prophesy not against the southern kingdom, but against Israel, the northern kingdom, about 750 BC. This is what happened. And God wanted Israel to know that they were accountable for living under God's law and were going to be punished because they had not done so. Rather than living as the people of God, Israel had become a decadent, corrupt, pagan nation that was full of sin. Amos delivered powerful and vivid messages that were ignored by the people of Israel to their own hurt. And then your book kind of just goes on and breaks down, the book of Amos for you. And so we want to talk about some of these things, some of the prophecy that Amos delivered to the Israel people. Okay, first, Amos used an effective device to make his point. He pointed out the sins of the pagan countries around Israel and basically got the Israelites to agree. He started out with, you see what those people are doing over there? That's awful. They shouldn't be doing those things. And Israel was like, you're right. They are awful people. They shouldn't be doing those things. And then Amos basically said, you're right. They are awful for doing those things. But guess what? You're doing those things as well, Israel. So that was kind of the problem. Israel thought they were above the law, they could do whatever they wanted, and they recognized the sin in other people, but didn't recognize it in their own lives. So Amos reminds Israel of the cause and effect. He basically says sin is going to lead you to punishment. So you need to repent so you can get the blessings of God. And if you don't repent, then you're going to get the judgment of God. Amos goes on to take up a lament. A lament is just basically a crying out, a pleading, a sorrowful kind of like, oh, this is bad, and a funeral basically for Israel. And despite Israel's failings and rejections of God, God appeals to the people to return to him. He's just like begging them, please come back to me. Amos goes on to say, woe to those who are at ease in Zion. You think you're living a great life? You think life is easy? You need to beware. He has two visions of complete destruction and one of a plumb line. And this plumb line shows Israel basically is off level. Okay, the plumb line is like a level that we would use now with the little bubble in it, make sure everything's exactly. And Amos is saying, you're off. You're not plumb. You're not level, and you need to fix yourself. And this was one of the dreams that he had, one of the visions he had. Unfortunately, the king of Israel doesn't want to listen to Amos, wants nothing to do with Amos, okay? So there's more warnings that come. There's a warning of a major earthquake that's going to happen, and that happens 2 years later. And the Lord continues to predict the calamity that would come upon Israel. But lastly, though, there's still some hope. There's always a hope in the prophecies, okay? In the promise of restoration, God says that one day he will restore the rule of David's line, okay? On page 156 of your book, it says this, okay? And we're going to close with this. It says, the warnings of Amos that Israel failed to recognize were soon fulfilled. In 722 BC, about a generation after Amos preached, Israel was conquered by the Assyrians. Many of its people were taken into exile and never were able to return.